Yes, I think we'll have questions now. We've got lots of questions from the audience. So I guess starting with Antarctica generally, Cameron asks, are you there right now? How many times have you been there, and what's the coldest temperature you've been in?
So I'm not there right now. I haven't been for a couple of years now. I've worked for in California for a few years on the 30-meter telescope, which is another big endeavor. But I will go in Chile. But I'm hoping to go there in a year or two again. So right now I'm in Canberra. I still have my sort of polar gears. I'm wearing things I would wear normally at the South Pole. I have the Adélie Land logo here. I got the South Pole cap, but I'm in boring Canberra where it's extremely cold right now. Now it's not as cold as the coldest temperature I've experienced, which was at Dome C at the end of the summer, which was about minus 55. But I have to say I've never did a winter over there. So I've never experienced myself the winter conditions. And the reason for that is because I'm specializing mostly on automated telescopes. So I'm kind of, I don't like the cold. So I basically built telescopes which will take care of themselves during the winter. So they can be cold and I can be back home in the warmth looking at the data from my house. But 55, okay, something to be said about temperatures. When they go to that kind of level, when it's so cold that it's minus 20, 30, 40, it doesn't make a difference, to be honest. What really bugs you, it's no longer the temperature, it's the wind, because the wind burns you. In the air, you got this little crystal called diamond dust. Essentially, it's a bit of ice coming from the ground, and it's being lifted up. And those crystals are very sharp. You can't tell, you have to look at them under a microscope, but they're very sharp. And so when the wind picks them up and blows them in your face, you can get cuts. So one year I was at the South Pole, I forgot my overall head protection, the wind started to blow, I started to cover my head, but my nose is just big enough that the tip of it it was exposed. And I got basically blisters from walking in the snow for about 10 minutes. So the wind is what's deadly. Whether it's minus 55 or minus 20, you can't tell the difference. It's too dry. The colder you are, the less water you get in the air, and therefore your body doesn't get that feeling of coldness. So it's not the temperature which could get you. It's the humidity, which there is not, and the wind. On a good day, we've had people actually playing beach volleyball outside. In fact, that photo actually is a few people who actually I played volleyball with. We were outside in underwear at minus 30. It was fine because it was no wind and there was a nice sunny sky.
Thank you. So I guess when you say, whether it's minus 55 or minus 20, and there's sort of no difference and it depends on the wind and everything. I guess Charlotte asks, how many jumpers do you need to wear? Is there much difference depending on whether it's summer or winter?
Okay, so I can only talk about the summer, but I think winter, you basically don't go outside for very long, quite frankly, because there's no sun to help you out. During the summer, so we're given, so every polar program, so I've been sponsored by the Australian polar program 1 year, by the French polar program another year, by the US. So I've basically worn the gear of multiple countries, and they all have one thing in common. You have multiple layers of socks. You have many options for gloves because you may have to take them off and to work outside and do something with your fingers, like screws and things which require dexterity. And so you need to have ways to quickly uncover and quickly cover. So they give you those mittens which have basically an easy way to get the fingertips off and back on. So you're wearing one thin layer and then a much thicker layer that you can remove quite easily. On the face, you normally have a full protection gear, and that's mostly for the wind. So you only have your eyes coming out, but the entire face, your ears especially, and your nose are covered. And then you have another beanie and you have the overall. Inside, you're wearing at least 3 layers. But on a good day, like I said, if you're exercising, if you're, playing beach volley or you're just, running a bit, it gets hot very quickly because if there is no wind and the sun is beating on you, then there is no thermal loss as much. So you're basically overheating. You can't get the heat out because there's nothing to carry it. There is no humidity. Normally, it's the water molecule in the air which carry the heat away from you. So you can essentially strip into your underwear and be fine for quite a while. Normally we would have gloves on, something for your ears and your boots, and you can actually be okay like this for an hour or so. Very variable.
Wow, okay. That's really interesting. And so I guess in surviving and living in Antarctica in general, what do you eat and how do you get fresh water?
Aha. Fresh water is easy because you just melt the ice. In fact, water is expensive because it takes a lot of fuel, because the unit of currency there in many ways is fuel. Fuel is expensive by a factor of 10 more than anywhere else, not because of the fuel itself, but the transportation. You have to carry massive amount of energy to the ice by boat, by plane, so if you do the cost per volume, you get a very, very expensive unit of volume. And so when you need to do anything to do with melting the ice or construction, anything, you basically think in terms of volume of fuel. And so getting water is easy. Now, food is very variable. So first of all, you need a lot more of it. That's the idea. At the South Pole, there is 5 regular meals. And basically, if you think you're having dinner, the kind of volume of calories that you would do that 5 times a day. So you'd have a big breakfast, a big lunch, and then you have a big afternoon snack, a big dinner, and then you would have something at about 10 or 11 o'clock, which is of the same volume. I remember counting my very first year. I was very curious about this very question, my very first year, because I was always hungry. I was starving. I mean, my first time I was like 23, 24, I think, just finishing my PhD. And I remember thinking, how much calories am I eating? And I remember my very first week, I was averaging 6,000 calories per day, which is twice as much as what you need. At the end of my first trip, which was about a month long, I lost about 15 kilograms. So eating twice as much as normal, I managed to lose 15 kilograms of weight. So the consumption of energy is massive, and you don't really feel it. You're just hungry all the time. And so some different bases have different foods. I mean, South Pole, it's very American, so you got lots of burgers and fried food. The French base, which is the one I'm showing right now, has a lot more gourmet food, actually. Because they get all the food from Australia on the way down. So basically Tasmania is the last shopping center. And so for Christmas, they serve kangaroo steaks, stuff like that. But also, some very French things, like, they would have a duck and stuff like that. So it's actually quite fancy. The meals are very important for another reason, is because when you go there, you work all the time. You go there for research, you go there and there is nothing fun to do apart from, you can play cards with somebody, but there's no weekend. So because you work so hard all the time, your meals are what you look forward to. You work in the morning and you think, oh, what's for lunch? Because you're always hungry, and then this is your time to socialize and do things. So the meals are very important for the mental health as well. That's very important. So I think all the programs take their meals very seriously. It's not just, here is a sandwich, off you go. It's a big moment in the day.
That's really good, because I was thinking, like, in Antarctica, maybe you'd be having like canned foods or something very basic, but I really like how they sort of put a lot of thought into that. So I guess, how do you get, is when you were saying, we were talking before about fuel, is that the main source of power when you're living in Antarctica?
Yes, and in fact, it's not regular fuel, it's what we call jet engine fuel, Jet A1. To simplify the problem of transportation and carrying fuel, we basically use the same fuel as the planes that are taking us to Antarctica. So all these Hercules, these twin otters, they use jet engine fuel. And so the base use the same fuel for running the generators and for everything else. And every time you think of logistics, the Apollo programs will ask you to break it down so that they can calculate how much fuel your experiments will take. How much reliance on big trucks, on lifting cranes, manpower. So they basically try to calculate that to know exactly what is your energy consumptions while you're there. It's a very important unit, because that's the thing that basically makes or breaks a successful summer and prepares for the winter. They need to have enough fuel. They need to make sure that everybody's safe. There is enough contingency that nobody's going to run out, because once you're stuck there, you're stuck there. So running out of fuel is not an option.
Yeah, absolutely. And so have there ever been any, I guess, miscalculations, or, what would be the emergency plan if you were stuck somewhere, stuck at a base, or you weren't able to travel back, and so on? What are sort of the dangers, I guess?
So the dangers, there's been quite a few examples already, are more medical. So if you're going to spend the winter over, first of all, there is a thorough medical test that you go through, even for summer actually. You spend the entire weekend with doctors, they test you everywhere you can. But if you're going to do a winter over, they, first of all, remove your appendix. You can't go there with your appendix there in your body, and remove your wisdom teeth. So any kind of surgery which could happen, and is a normally would be an emergency surgery, like, you know, tooth pain and appendix. You have to go there without those things in your body, because otherwise you are a threat to the safety of the base. You would have to be brought back. How do we get you back? It's difficult. But still, there has been some medical emergencies. So a few years back, I can't remember the exact year, but I want to say 2003, I think. The medical doctor of the South Pole Station, a woman, found out that she had breast cancer. And so there was an emergency, and they had to basically fly over the South Pole in the middle of winter. They try not to land there because it's so cold that the planes don't take off again, or it's very hard for them too, because it gets too cold, everything gets stuck. And because it's so high, there isn't much lift to begin with. So it's really hard to take off and land. So they basically drop off the equipment. So that year, they had to basically drop off medical surgery equipment for the doctor and the plumber to perform the cancer removal surgery in an emergency. That has happened at least 3 times that I know of. At Vostok, a Russian base, same thing. Back in the 80s, the doctor found that he had his appendix that needed to be removed. That was before they made it compulsory. He basically performed surgery on himself, and there is photos of him opening his belly and removing his appendix. And I think it has happened one more time at the South Pole for another type of surgery. I forgot what it is on top of that, but medical emergencies are very tough to deal with. So you have to go there in top health, and hopefully with no need for surgery, because if you do, it's going to be a massive headache to get you to, to stay alive. So that's the biggest problem. Otherwise, in terms of, planning, I think nobody has a story of, we didn't have enough food, we didn't have enough fuel. The Apollo programs are very conservative with that. Very careful, professional, and this hasn't happened yet.
Wow, okay. Some of those stories, they sound very, very intense and very stressful. So I imagine a lot of the problems come from, like you said, medical health. And I guess kind of likening it to going to space or something, do you have to do a lot of exercise to keep up your health and everything during the day and while you're staying there?
So the physical exercise is important, but not as much as space, because you still are under the influence of gravity. I mean, you're on the ground, so your body still needs to act normal, but it is a bit more sedentary because you're stuck in a small volume for a long time. So there is bikes, there is treadmills to exercise. Not quite like space, but what this has in common with space is more like the cabin fever factor. In the winter, in some bases, there is basically 10 people that are stuck together in a small confined space for almost 7 months. And so the mental health aspect, the groups starting to form within those small groups. So I know that at Dome-C, for example, the European Space Agency spent some time studying the behavior of people under these conditions, because they can learn about how people would behave in space in small confinement, like at the International Space Station. But here we have the ways to study people more easily, because you can just observe them. So there was a doctor that year from the Space Agency trying to understand exactly the dynamics, the group dynamics that affects the mind and will potentially cause problem. There has been a year where somebody would basically lose it a bit and refuse to work. For example, there was a story of an electrician who was supposed to work during the winter, finishing the base, one of the earliest year of the base at Dome-C, and he basically decided, no, I'm not going to work anymore. And he spent the entire winter doing nothing. So there was this, psychological impact that the isolation causes.
Yeah, wow. Have you yourself had any sort of scary experiences, or I guess related to physical and mental health or whatever? And also on the opposite note, I guess, what's the most exciting experience you've had whilst in Antarctica?
So two different questions. So the first question, no, I haven't had any horror stories. I mean, going there during the summer makes things easier because you have more people in summer, but 4 times as many. You remember there was 4,000 people in summer, 1,000 in winter. So during the summer, there's a lot more activity. It's a lot busier. So I think there is less chance of you feeling isolated. It feels like being in a station almost, where you see people coming and going. So it's a lot more busy. I think for the mental, I think it's a lot easier than the winter. In terms of amazing experience, I have a couple. On that photo I'm showing, we were a group at the beginning of the summer at Dumont-Durville, and we basically discovered blue icebergs. If you Google blue icebergs, there is a photo that shows, but it's always on the internet, that comes out all the time. And actually a photo I took in 2005, I believe. And finding those blue icebergs was really something because I'd never seen that before. And a blue iceberg is essentially an iceberg which has spent a lot of time in the ice and got tipped over, revealing the other side, the salty water side, and it gives you these crystal blue colors, which look absolutely amazing. So to me, that was like the first wow factor. Another thing which I really enjoyed a lot is the helicopter travel. I mean, before Antarctica, I'd never been onto a helicopter, and going around icebergs with a helicopter it's like I felt like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. Basically, it's kind of this. It's thrilling. It's awesome. So helicopter ride, awesome. Blue icebergs, awesome. And of course, the wildlife on the coast, the penguins. I mean, it's kind of things that it's not like a zoo. You are the zoo.
Yes. Selga asks, what kind of penguins are they?
So I've only seen 3 types, but the most common ones are the Adelie penguins, the one that you show on this little video here. They're at the Dumont-Durville station. It's actually a little island, technically, but because of the ice, you can't tell it's an island because you're right next to the coast. And on this rock, basically, you've got 4,000 Adelie penguins. So they're the small ones, they're about 50, 60 centimeters. And then there is a colony of emperor penguins, which is where the movie I was mentioning earlier was filmed. And what's amazing about those penguins is that they don't have any predators on the ground. They never experience any threat to their body and their life on land. Only the seals are a threat to them when they are in the water. So they have no self-concept of survival. You can basically walk amongst them. You can basically be next to them. They don't acknowledge you. If there is one car, one truck on the base, you could run over those penguins if you wanted, because they don't get out of the way. They don't know. There is no threat, and so they behave very strangely. You think they're going to run away. They don't. And sometimes you see them next to the seals that are their worst enemy in the ice, on the water, but on the land, they're literally a meter away from each other. But the penguins are safe because they know that on land, the seal can't catch them. So they behave, again, completely differently on the water and on the ice. It's very strange, but they're really fun, really fun. They smell funky, though. They smell very funky.
Wow, that's so interesting that penguins see seals as more of a threat than even, humans and all of our vehicles and equipment and so on. I guess, speaking of, your favorite experiences, have you done much stargazing while you're there? And if so, what constellations can you see? And are there any stars in Antarctica that you can see only in the South Pole and nowhere else?
So again, the answer is going to be no, because I was there during the daytime and my telescopes were there during the winter time. So every time I've been there, I've never seen the sun go down the horizon. It was never even close to being nighttime. You can see the sun going up and just going in circles. So I never saw with my own eyes the stars from Antarctica. Now the sky is very similar to what we have in Australia. I mean, we're in the southern hemisphere, so you're going to have a Southern Cross and there's very similar constellations. They're going to be at different locations, obviously, but otherwise it's very much the same. But one thing which is important is that, if you're there in winter, you will have a very pristine sky. It's like being in the countryside and things will glow extremely bright and it's going to be beautiful, no question. If you're lucky also during your travel, just when you cross the polar circles, you could also, what I've seen is Aurora Borealis. So at Dome Sea, at the South Pole, you're too far south to see the auroras. But when you travel and you can still have nighttime, so basically on the boat, we had a few evenings where we saw the auroras. So that was something which was pretty unique. I've seen them in the north before, but in the north it's easier because there's a lot more continents. But in the south, you basically have to be on the water to be able to see them, essentially.
Oh, I see. So does why do you have to be on the water compared to, I guess, on land?
Well, I mean, you can see them at the coast as well. That's not quite relevant. But if you look at the locations of where the ionization takes place, it's not at the South Pole or on the North Pole exactly. It's around basically that vortex I was telling you about. So it's a few thousand kilometers away from the South Pole exactly. So if you're in the center of the continent, you're too far. The auroras would be too low in the horizon to be seen. But if you're at the very coast, or basically traveling to the coast, that's where you have the best chance to see them regularly.
Ah, okay, that's quite interesting. And I guess sort of wrapping up with the last few questions. What do you see with the, do you see yourself going back to Antarctica again? And also what do you think the sort of future of the, all the bases and the stations in Antarctica are?
So that's a great question. I mean, there's a personal answer, and then there is a more general answer. I mean, I think the general answer is right now, the polar programs are all affected by COVID as well, and there's a lot of slowing down happening at the poles. I know that last summer was basically a survival summer. It was more about, let's get food back in, let's get minimum transportation, but new stuff, new science was not basically accepted on the ice because the logistics were reduced. So what I'm first of all hoping for is that, we get out of this crisis so that basically the flow of people and the flow of science can actually go back to Antarctica. Personally, I'm working on science experiments so I told you about why the Antarctica is good for exoplanets, because you have this constant nighttime. There is another reason why we want this constant nighttime, and it's to basically find what we call transient events. So supernovas, things that go boom, because you have to be there, you have to catch it. And sometimes, there may be an explosion, but it's daytime and you're going to miss it. So at the South Pole, we can basically scan the sky continuously every night, take the same pictures of the sky and look for these differences. The way we find explosions in the universe is not by just looking at them. We basically have to take images every night and subtract them from one another. So I take a picture of the one patch of the sky. The next night, I take another image, the exact same place. And if something is either missing or new, by taking the difference of the two images, this will come out. So you need to do a lot of observations and a lot of subtractions until you catch something that just went boom, or something that just disappeared. And so I think this constant night is great, because then you don't have the sun stopping you every 12 hours. You can, yes, you have to do it twice a year, basically. You have, for 6 months, you don't do anything, but you could have one telescope in the North Pole and one in the South Pole, and then you cover the entire sky all the time and you never miss a thing. So this is something that I want to do in the next couple of years, but I know that right now, everything is a bit slower because of COVID. So a lot of people like me are kind of waiting for a return to normal.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And last question, Catherine asks, how many exoplanets have been found in Antarctica?
Oh, that's a question I don't have the answer for, actually. It's a lot, but the exact number I don't know. And it's there's two facets to this. There is a new one, and then the one that are basically being characterized or studied more in details from Antarctica, because we have space telescopes at Kepler that found a lot of them already, but then we don't know enough about those objects, or we need more accurate measurements. So we do a lot of basically follow-up observations from space telescopes. So I know that there was many new ones found, and there was a lot more being characterized in details, where we can calculate the orbits, their size, their distance away from the stars a lot more accurately. So I'm not an expert, so I don't have all the numbers on top of my head. And also this changes all the time. So probably, if I looked it up last month, probably my answer would be different from, like, let's say 2 or 3 months ago, because it's happening in more are being discovered all the time. I know it's in the hundreds, basically.
Wow, that's super interesting. Thank you very much. I guess we'll wrap up now. Thank you very much for your super interesting talk on astronomy in Antarctica. I'll pass it over to Ryan to conclude.
I have one last question for Tony, if you want to turn stuff back on. Cool. You have less trouble with that than me. So the last question is, what do you enjoy most about your job?
Oh, that's a long question here. I think. How much time do we have? It's very loaded. So when I was a student 20 years ago, just not to tell my age, but I just did. I wanted to do astronomy for just to learn more about the universe in general. There was all these questions about when I was a student, there was no exoplanets. Basically, it was before the exoplanets became exoplanets. So there was a lot of things to discover like them. But as you become as you work in this field, I realize I love to play with instrumentation because it takes me away from the computer. People don't realize that astronomers are facing the computer all the time. We don't look through telescopes with our eyes. We take pictures with cameras, and so we spend a lot of time on the computer. You're working with instrumentation is a way to cut the daily routine and be in the lab, be on the computer, talking with people. There is a lot of international projects that you can get involved with. So there was variety. And there was excitement in doing something which is not always the same, but pure astronomy sometimes suffers off. At least that's the way I saw it when I was a student. And of course, instrumentation is exciting because you feel like you're at the forefront of that science. Basically, you build what the scientists need. They tell you, I need this, I need to see that. Can you build something for me to do that? So you're always at the beginning of the story. You're always ahead of the game. It's not like, the discoveries are done much, much later, but it starts with a new telescope, a new instrument, which then 10 years later will be making some amazing discoveries. So I like being first, basically.
Yeah, that's incredible. Definitely a great job to have and a great position to be in. I'm sure many of the young stars will be excited to try and get into a similar position that you're in the future. And I'm sure many of them can do that as well if they put their mind to it and work hard. So thank you very much, Tony. It's been a great talk.